Imagine uh, dedicating 40 years of your life to saving patients. I mean, 40 long years. And then the very system you work for illegally hacks into your confidential files.
Right, and then forces you into this completely humiliating psychiatric evaluation.
Exactly. And, effectively bankrupts you. And why? Because you pointed out a fatal flaw in a cost-saving spreadsheet.
It's just wild.
It really is. So welcome to this deep dive. Today's journey feels a lot like a legal thriller you'd binge on a weekend, but it is actually a real-world case study in medical ethics.
Yeah, medical ethics, bureaucracy, and just incredible human resilience. For you listening, we are unpacking an absolute mountain of material today.
We really are.
I mean, we've got clinical case files, an official 2005 NHS whistleblower guidance letter, archives from the doctors.net medical forum, plus, these incredibly dense UK legal judgments.
Oh, and even technical breakdowns of a modern healthcare app, which we'll get to later. But the mission of this deep dive is to trace the 14-year saga of Dr. Kadiali Srivatsa.
Right. He was a doctor who tried to warn the UK healthcare system about this fundamental shift in patient care, a shift that he believed was, frankly, outright dangerous.
Yeah, and for his trouble, he was completely crushed by the very machinery he was trying to protect. Now, before we really get into the weeds, we need to state something very clearly.
Definitely.
Our goal here is not to take a political stance on the National Health Service or government funding or anything like that. We are just here to impartially explore the facts, the events, and the arguments exactly as they happened in the source material.
Yeah, exactly as they were argued in the legal and medical files. So, to start, we have to go back to the early 2000s in the UK.
Right, setting the scene.
Yeah. Dr. Srivatsa is a veteran doctor. He has over 40 years of experience, mostly in intensive pediatric and critical care.
So he's seen the worst of the worst.
Oh, absolutely. The most extreme, terrifying medical scenarios you can imagine. He transitions to working as a salaried general practitioner, a GP, in Woking. Yep. And this coincides with this big experiment rolled out by the local health authority, which was the Surrey Primary Care Trust.
Right, the PCT. They set up these independent nurse-led practices and walk-in clinics.
Yes.
So instead of seeing a doctor, registered patients are consulting with nurses. The nurses are examining them, diagnosing them, and offering medical advice and treatment.
Right. And the overarching goal here was to test if the NHS could adopt this model more broadly across the whole country, create independent nurse-led practices everywhere.
Because it's cheaper.
Exactly. And Dr. Srivatsa immediately starts sounding the alarm. When you read his forum posts from 2006, the concern is just palpable.
Yeah, I saw those. He talks about nurses being put on call for emergencies without any qualified GP backup available.
Which is terrifying. He publicly asks his peers on this medical forum, he says, is it safe to continue this experiment?
And the response he gets on that forum is pretty blunt, right? Another user, going by the name Pie Powder, basically tells him that this isn't an accident.
No, not at all.
It is a deliberate shift by the government to move power from medics to nurses because it provides cheaper community care.
Yeah, it was a known systemic shift. But, on the surface, to a layperson, letting nurses handle basic complaints just sounds like a smart efficiency upgrade.
Right.
So why was Srivatsa so terrified by this?
Okay, let's unpack this, because it comes down to the mechanics of how clinical diagnosis actually works. Srivatsa was basically asked to train these nurses to prescribe antibiotics.
Okay.
But the timeline he was given to accomplish this was just 15 days.
Wow. 15 days to learn antibiotic prescribing?
Yeah, and he flat out refused. He argued that doing so was fundamentally impossible because medicine isn't just about applying evidence-based medicine statistics.
Right, the EBM guidelines.
Exactly. He mentions that an evidence-based guideline might dictate that, say, a certain antibiotic is the right choice for 80% of sore throats.
And that sounds great on a spreadsheet.
It does. But how do you identify the 20% who will not respond to that standard guideline?
That's the catch.
Right. You can memorize a diagnostic decision tree in 15 days. You learn, if symptom X, then drug Y. But clinical experience is what teaches you the nuances.
Yeah, the intuition built over decades.
Exactly. It teaches a practitioner to look at a patient's skin pallor, their microexpressions, how they're breathing, and realize that while it looks like a simple sore throat, it is actually something far more sinister.
I love the analogy you were using earlier for this.
Oh, right. It's a bit like an airline trying to save money by letting the flight attendants land the plane using a quick reference checklist.
Yes. Instead of relying on a pilot who has, 10,000 hours of actual flight experience.
Exactly. The flight attendant is highly trained for their specific, vital job in the cabin. We need them. But landing the plane requires a totally different depth of intuition and pattern recognition.
That captures his argument perfectly, because by allowing nurses to be the absolute first port of call, Srivatsa argued the system was creating this massive false sense of security.
A false sense of security.
Yeah. Patients trusted that the person in the light coat examining them had the deep diagnostic knowledge to actually cure them.
Right, because they look the part.
But in reality, they were often being seen by someone trained to just follow a surface-level protocol. And this friction between deep clinical experience and protocol-driven care, it wasn't just theoretical.
No, not at all. Reading through the actual case files Srivatsa compiled is genuinely chilling. He started documenting what he explicitly categorized as negligent care emerging from these walk-in clinics.
Yeah, the clinical errors he documented were systemic diagnostic failures, simply because the foundational medical knowledge just wasn't present.
Give us some of the examples from the files, because they are rough.
They really are. To give you a visceral sense of this, he documented a family who came in completely infested with scabies.
Oh, God.
Right. And the clinic misdiagnosed them as simply having a generic eczema flare-up.
Wow, just eczema.
Yeah. Then there's a case of a pregnant woman who presents with tummy pain and vomiting, and she is casually treated for generic gastritis.
Which is so dangerous during pregnancy.
Extremely. Or the 12-year-old girl whose chronic tiredness was just brushed off and treated as simple anemia.
And what happened to her?
By the time she was 14, she had lost a kidney.
Oh, my God. Just because they missed the early signs.
Exactly. And it continues. A simple throat infection turned into a highly dangerous tonsillar abscess because the nurse prescribed a dose of antibiotics that was drastically too low.
Because they just followed a basic chart, probably.
Right. Another young woman came in with hirsutism, which is excessive body hair.
Okay, which usually points to something hormonal, right?
Exactly, like polycystic ovary syndrome. It's a major diagnostic clue, but the clinic missed it entirely.
How do you miss that?
Because the nurse conducted the physical examination while the patient kept her clothes on.
You're kidding.
No, they just completely failed to do a proper exam.
Now, I have to push back here for a second, just playing devil's advocate. If you are listening to this, you might naturally wonder, wait, aren't doctors human too? Fully qualified, board-certified doctors make misdiagnoses all the time. So is it really fair to pin this entirely on the nurse-led model?
That is a very valid pushback, and Srivatsa actually addresses the core of that in his ethical writings.
What does he say?
He argues that our culture has been heavily brainwashed, partly through TV medical dramas, to believe a doctor's primary role is to dramatically save lives in a chaotic emergency room.
Like Grey's Anatomy or ER.
Exactly. But Srivatsa states that the first and most vital duty of a doctor is much quieter. It is to make a correct diagnosis incredibly early to prevent those dramatic complications from ever happening in the first place.
That makes a lot of sense. And he makes a fascinating point in the sources about cures versus masking symptoms, doesn't he?
He does. He points out that true cures in medicine are remarkably rare. At the time, antibiotics were one of the only drug classes that actually cured an infection by eliminating the underlying bacteria.
Right.
But most other commonly prescribed drugs, anti-inflammatories, antidepressants, antivirals, steroids, they rarely cure.
They just mask the symptoms.
Exactly. They make the patient feel better without eliminating the root cause.
To use a different metaphor, it's like giving someone symptom maskers without knowing the underlying disease is like putting a piece of black electrical tape over your car's check engine light.
Yes, perfect analogy.
The car feels fine to drive for a few miles, you don't see the warning anymore, but the engine is still quietly destroying itself under the hood.
And that is exactly what he considered a profound ethical failure. If an underqualified practitioner misses the deeper diagnosis and just hands out symptom maskers, they are providing that false sense of security while the disease progresses. He called it quackery.
Wow, he didn't hold back.
No, he didn't. So armed with these case files, Srivatsa takes what he believes is the proper ethical route. He makes a protected whistleblower disclosure.
Right. According to the NHS's own 2005 whistleblower guidance documents, the process is clear. You report up the chain to protect patients.
Exactly. He assumes the chairman of the Surrey Primary Care Trust will review his evidence, call a meeting, discuss the issues, and correct the safety protocols.
But what actually unfolds over the next few months is straight out of a Kafka novel.
It really is.
3 months after he makes this highly confidential, legally protected disclosure to the highest level of the local health authority, Srivatsa receives an email.
Yeah.
He discovers that the chairman of the PCT didn't initiate an independent investigation at all. Instead, the chairman simply forwarded Srivatsa's complaint directly to the managers of the walk-in clinic and the nurse-led practice he was reporting.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I am still struggling to wrap my head around this. It's like giving a witness's sworn statement directly to the mob boss they are testifying against.
Exactly. You are literally handing the target of a negligence complaint the name and the evidence of the person blowing the whistle on him.
It is a staggering breach in protocol. And remember, Srivatsa's complaint was severely detrimental to these managers. It was their clinics making the clinical errors.
So what do?
According to Srivatsa's extensive documentation, what follows is a coordinated, relentless campaign of retaliation designed to completely destroy his career. The clinic suddenly initiates 7 different inquiries into Srivatsa.
7?
7, all based on completely unsubstantiated complaints.
Just to bury him in paperwork and accusations.
Yeah. And to find the dirt needed to fuel these inquiries, the clinic staff resorted to desperate measures. They actually breached what is known in the UK as the Caldecott Principle.
Okay, explain the Caldecott Principle, because that is a really big deal in the UK system.
It is. The Caldecott Principles are the absolute foundation of patient data protection in the UK, established back in 1997. They dictate that patient information must be kept strictly confidential and only accessed on a strict need-to-know basis for direct care.
So you can't just browse medical records for fun.
Exactly. But the clinic staff illegally dug through the confidential clinical notes of Srivatsa's patients without any consent from the patients or from Srivatsa himself. They were essentially weaponizing patient trust, hunting for any minor administrative flaw or typo they could use against him.
The psychological warfare here is just brutal. They drag out an administrative inquiry that should have taken, 5 weeks?
Yeah, 5 weeks.
And they drag it out into a grinding, year-long ordeal. Then they force him into a humiliating psychiatric evaluation, hoping to prove he's unstable.
But the plan actually backfires.
It does. The psychiatrist evaluates him, looks at the situation, and tells Srivatsa, this environment is actively detrimental to your mental health. You must not return to that surgery.
Incredibly, though, the director of medical services completely ignores the psychiatric advice and attempts to force him to return to the clinic anyway.
That is wild.
Yeah. Srivatsa refuses. He stays home. The personal notes from this time show a man completely paralyzed by paranoia, and for good reason.
I mean, I would be too.
Right. He was absolutely terrified that the clinic staff, who had already demonstrated they would fabricate complaints and illegally access medical records, would invent a life-destroying accusation against him.
Like what?
He specifically feared they would manufacture a claim of sexual abuse against him.
Oh, wow.
Which would ruin him before he even had a chance to defend himself. So he refused to go back into the building.
So he tries to pivot. He decides to find work elsewhere as a locum, the substitute doctor. He initiates official grievance proceedings, bringing 99 specific points of wrongdoing to his British Medical Association representative.
And what does the union do?
The BMA rep, the person explicitly tasked with defending him, basically evades discussing those 99 points entirely. He just brushes them off.
The institutional doors are slamming shut one by one. And then comes the final administrative blow.
Right.
When Srivatsa attempts to log in and work at other surgeries to earn a living, he finds out he is blocked. The authorities inform him that his name is missing from the medical performers list.
Which is a mandatory registry for doctors in the UK, right?
Yes, you can't work without being on it. And they blame it on a so-called computer error.
Oh, how convenient. A computer error that instantly makes a highly qualified doctor completely unemployable.
Exactly. His income drops to zero, his pension contributions stop, he is financially suffocated and ultimately bankrupted.
It is just infuriating. So, script of his livelihood, Srivatsa has no choice but to turn to the legal system. He takes his fight to the employment tribunal.
But the bureaucracy doesn't just fight him on the facts. It initiates this series of shape-shifting legal maneuvers designed to crush him financially.
Okay, I got completely lost in the legal documents here. From what I understand, the government literally transferred his employment contract to a private company against his will. How is that even mechanically possible?
It hinges on a piece of UK employment law called 2PE, That stands for Transfer of Undertakings Protection of Employment Regulations.
Okay.
2UP was originally designed to protect employees. If a business is sold, 2UPE ensures the new owner can't just fire everyone. They inherit the employees and their contracts.
That sounds good in theory.
Right. But in May 2011, the state weaponizes this regulation. They forcibly transfer Srivatsa's contract and all the legal liabilities associated with his whistleblower case to a private company called Practice Surgeries Ltd.
Wait, so he has no say in this?
Absolutely no say in this transaction.
So his legal fight against the government is suddenly outsourced to a private corporation.
Exactly. And the administrative sleight of hand goes even further. Shortly after that, the government completely abolishes the Surrey Primary Care Trust.
They just delete it.
They just wipe the entity he originally sued off the map. Any remaining liability that wasn't transferred to the private company gets kicked all the way up the chain to the Secretary of State for Health.
This is unbelievable. So this unemployed, bankrupt doctor walks into a tribunal thinking he's suing a local health board. And suddenly he is facing two massive, incredibly deep-pocketed defendants, a private corporation and the actual state government.
Yes. And they have infinite resources to file endless procedural motion. Facing these staggering legal fees, Srivatsa is starved out. In October 2011, his solicitor writes to the tribunal. Srivatsa is forced to formally withdraw his case entirely because he lacks the funds to continue the fight.
This is the part that makes my blood boil. It was never about proving Srivatsa wrong on the medical facts.
No, never.
When you look at the transcripts, the state never actually attempts to argue that the medical errors didn't happen. It was purely a war of attrition. Bleed him dry until he has to drop it.
The strategy gets even darker when we look at what the legal system allowed them to do next. This raises an important question about how the law handles whistleblowers.
What happened next?
Years later, Srivatsa miraculously gathers the resources to bring his case to the High Court, seeking delayed justice. The defense responds with a maneuver that the appellate judges later openly criticize as a neat technical swipe.
A neat technical swipe.
Yeah. They invoked a legal doctrine called cause of action estoppel, also known as res judicata.
Break that down for us. What does that actually mean in a courtroom?
The defense cited a 19th century legal precedent, a case called Henderson v. Henderson. They argued that because Srivatsa had voluntarily withdrawn his previous tribunal case back in 2011, he was legally barred from ever bringing those claims up again.
Even though everyone knew he only withdrew because he was bankrupt.
Exactly. The doctrine basically says you cannot litigate the same issue twice.
So let me get this straight. The state bankrupts him, forces him to drop the case because he can't afford the fees, and then years later tries to use the bankruptcy they engineered as a legal shield to say, sorry, you missed your chance to sue us.
That is their exact argument.
That is infuriating logic.
And a lower judge actually agreed with them initially. They threw the case out without hearing a single piece of medical evidence regarding the patient danger.
It looked like the absolute end of the road. The technicality was going to bury the truth forever. Srivatsa is destitute, but he refuses to let it end there. He appeals the decision.
Yes. And this brings us to the stunning 2018 Court of Appeal reversal.
The tide finally turns.
It does. Lord Justice Lewison, sitting alongside two other senior appellate judges, examined this procedural nightmare and fundamentally disagreed with the lower court.
Thank goodness.
The ruling established a massive precedent. They basically said, withdrawing a claim because you are financially crushed by the state is not the same as abandoning the merits of your claim.
Right.
The court ruled it was profoundly unjust to allow the state to eliminate a whistleblower's case on a procedural technicality without ever examining the evidence of wrongdoing.
And the Supreme Court backed this up. You have 6 senior judges across the appellate levels who finally look at the reality of what happened. They pierce through the legal loophole, and Srivatsa is finally granted permission to take his case to trial.
It is a monumental David and Goliath victory. He beat the infinite resources of the state apparatus.
He did.
But we have to look at what this all means for him personally, because the reality of his life after this ruling is highly bittersweet.
Yeah, so what does this all mean? He wins this landmark legal precedent, but the 14-year battle has physically and financially broken him.
Completely broken him.
He is left living on a meager pension of £500 a month. Without a home and without his family or community support in the UK, he is forced to return to India.
Yeah.
How does a person even survive that kind of psychological blow?
Yeah.
You dedicate your life to a profession you revere, you throw away your entire career to protect patients you will never even meet, and your reward is bankruptcy and exile.
He definitely struggled with that reality. He questioned his own sanity. He asked himself, why did I do what I did? Am I a fool for throwing away a career I was so passionate about?
That's heartbreaking.
But Srivatsa makes a remarkable pivot. He realizes that even outside the rigid structure of the NHS, his knowledge can still save lives. He returns to his roots in India, but he pairs his decades of clinical experience with modern technology. He develops a healthcare app called Maya.
This is where the story gets incredibly full circle. There's a fascinating transcript in our sources
Hmm.
where an AI analysis, I think ChatGPT, went through his life's work and compared him to Charaka.
Yes, Charaka, the ancient father of Ayurveda. The comparison is deeply fitting.
Oh, so.
Charaka's foundational principles in ancient medicine were prevention, protection, and heal. Srivatsa builds the Maya app on those exact principles. Drawing on his years in intensive care, he took thousands of highly complex medical complaints and narrowed them down to just 12 core presenting symptoms.
12 core symptoms.
Yeah, and he realized that by tracking specific combinations of just 3 of those core symptoms at a time, he could give patients incredibly accurate early insights into what was actually happening in their bodies.
His ultimate goal with this technology is patient empowerment. He asserts that up to 80% of visits to the hospital for common illnesses are actually unnecessary if the patient understands what is happening early enough.
Exactly.
If patients have the tools to understand their symptoms accurately at home, they save money, they avoid the anxiety of a waiting room, and crucially, they stay out of the hospital ecosystem entirely unless it is a true emergency.
Which brings us directly back to his very first warning about the nurse-led clinics in Woking.
Oh, wow. You're right.
He was desperate to prevent the reckless overprescription of antibiotics. By keeping people out of clinics when they only have a viral infection, he is actively fighting against antimicrobial resistance, or AMR.
AMR, right.
He is trying to save antibiotics, the one drug class that actually cures people, from becoming completely useless.
He was fighting a hyper-local bureaucratic battle in Surrey in 2004, but his app is fighting a global existential battle today.
Exactly. He took the absolute worst, most destructive experience of his professional life and synthesized it into a tool designed to protect humanity in what he calls the post-antibiotic era.
It really is a staggering journey. We have traced the life of a doctor who sacrificed his livelihood to protect the purity of early clinical diagnosis. He fought a 14-year battle against the infinite, shape-shifting resources of the state.
Yeah.
He pierced a massive legal loophole regarding whistleblower rights, and he returned to his roots to heal people through technology.
It forces you to look at the massive healthcare systems we rely on and the rare whistleblowers who try to fix them in a completely different light.
It really does. And it leaves us with something really vital for you listening to mull over as we wrap up. Dr. Srivatsa warned us decades ago that if we treat medicine purely as a cost-saving algorithm, where a quick checklist, an administrative protocol, or a minimally trained practitioner replaces the deep clinical intuition of a human listening to your story, we might save money on a spreadsheet.
Right.
But at what cost to our actual safety?
If we connect his warning to the bigger picture today, we are moving rapidly into an era of AI-driven healthcare, telemedicine algorithms, and automated triage.
Oh, absolutely we are.
It raises a critical, uncomfortable question. As we rush to optimize and automate our medical care, are we making the exact same mistake with technology that Srivatsa warned the NHS about in the early 2000s?
Are we once again trading the deep intuition of science for a cheaper illusion of competence? Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Stay insanely curious, and we will catch you next time.